Right. Well, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world joining us today. I'm Amy Darathan, Vice President of Curriculum and Content for Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and I am thrilled to be here with you today and have a group of panelists from all over the world joining us. I want to take a quick second to thank you for joining the virtual series. It gives me such pleasure to do this YouTube live broadcast today. We are gathered together as a group that our primary focus is on student achievement. We are a group of educational experts, and we're going to talk today about planning for digital transformation. We all say that thinking, wow, it's been a heck of a year, right? And that we've grown probably so much in so many ways. So let me quickly introduce the crew that we have here today. We have Tanika joining us as the Deputy Dean from the African Leadership Academy in South Africa. Thank you so much, Tanika, for joining us. We have John Lewis, the CEO and founder of IVA Global Schools. It's a pleasure to have you here. Brian Kissman is the head of schools from the American School of Kosovo. And then, so important, we have Nikki joining us today from Pinewood American School in Greece, representing the Main Street and our teacher experience. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. I want to take a quick second to talk about the transition that has happened over the last year. If somebody would have told us pre-pandemic that we would be where we are today, I would never have believed them. In many ways, it was a bit of a force function, right? We were all forced into evolving and changing and learning to teach in a new way. So I want to start by talking about what's the big change over the past year, and what do you predict will happen in the next 12 to 18 months? And I'm going to flip it over to John. And John, if you want to start us off, you can pass it on to someone else then.
Great. Thanks, Amy. And thanks again for inviting me. It's great to be here. Well, for us, it's been incredible. We've gone from the physical classroom, being physical human beings in a physical space, to moving into a 3D avatar world where we represent ourselves by way of avatars in this 3D space. We find ourselves in a virtual classroom and we walk around as avatars. We've got posters around the walls of our virtual classroom. They're all interactive. They're not static. Our avatars can move to the posters, click on them, watch videos, come back. We have assemblies where we call on the avatars onto the stage. We shake their hands. We let them do a little bit of a dance on the stage, all in a 3D avatar world. Who would have thought? I certainly wouldn't have thought, but what this transition has done has really made us think hard and really let our creative juices flow. And this is where we find ourselves in and at IVA Global School. I'm going to pass it on to Brian.
Well, thank you, John. So, at the American School of Kosovo, we moved into a new campus about 3 years ago. But to be honest with you, Kosovo is not a wealthy country. But it's an up-and-coming country. And so we're just in the very beginnings of going 21st century. Let's bring your own devices, but we're not there with smart boards or 3D interactive walls just yet. But, you know, it's really about 21st century. It's one-to-one, it's smart boards, it's Google Classroom, it's apps, it's different platforms, right? And of course, like all of us, we see 21st century technology not as an end to itself, but for communication, networking, research, innovation, and as a tool, you know. And so, but you know, one thing that's very clear to us, and you know, I happen to be working on a few projects myself for what might be the next generation of online learning, but we're only in the very pioneering stages. And that's what's cool. You know, as amazing as Khan Academy is and can be for the flipped classroom and so forth, it's very primitive if you really want to imagine what's just 10 years down the road, which will be virtual reality. Our monitors and TV screens will be interactive like an iPad. And so we've done a lot of research on this. So, you know, it's really exciting to see where we're going next. And one thing that's become very clear, and I've done a lot of research on this, where they were projecting us to be in 2025, well, we're already there now, and COVID forced it to happen. So that's maybe the blessing. And so where we're going to be actually be in 2025 and 2030 is it's hard for many of us to imagine. But hey, I think I'll turn it over to our classroom teacher,
Nikki.
Nikki. Thank you, Nikki. And Nikki, so as you're hearing us administrators and us leaders talk about this, what's going on in the classroom for you? Whoops, did we lose Nikki?
We may have. Taniko, do you want to take that off and see
Please.
where we
I'm here, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so I was expecting the pass, thank you. I agree with everything you said 100%. Right now we're at the very beginning of figuring things out and making things happen and trying out things and seeing what works and what doesn't. I think it's really important that teachers are flexible and take advantage of all these online platforms that we have access to. Also, but on the other hand, I really appreciate that right now we're back in the classroom and I can see the kids, how they're doing. However, we have to be aware of the situation and the transition to online learning, and that's it.
Right. Taniko, do you?
Yeah, great. I love how Brian phrased, I guess, looking at COVID through a different lens of blessings and how it's blessed the education sector. Because I think with all the difficulty of a pandemic and the impact that it's had on the world, at times it's difficult to see the rainbow. And I think the rainbow from COVID for the education sector has been that pioneering into the space that we had to go into, but perhaps with the comfort of things as they have been, we had no real push. I think moving from an emergency virtual and remote space, really it was an emergency. We all went into that space because we had no other choice. I last year was in a different school as deputy overseeing innovation at St. Mary's Waverley, and now find myself at the African Leadership Academy as deputy dean, really speaking to student success. And I think that emergency mode, then when things began to normalize as the peak came down in different regions of the world, we moved more into a hybrid system. So integrating virtual remote aspects that we had experienced from March for many parts of the world through to June, at least in South Africa, to now a hybrid system where we could incorporate a bit of the experience of the remote virtual space with the traditional classroom. What I think we face now and where we are to go is the choice between a completely online space. It's interesting that the market for online schools, and I speak with my parents right now, two of my children are enrolled in an online school here in South Africa. I know it's a bit, it's like, oh, a teacher doing that. But yes, and the idea also of schools deciding to work in a hybrid system, I think that's also dictated by the fact that COVID is still with us, and so children are not able to come to school, perhaps out of illness or having to quarantine or having to isolate. So the second option, really looking at a space of a hybrid system. But to be honest, I think a whole lot of us, I don't think anyone sitting on the panel necessarily would like to go back to the traditional. But I actually think gone are those days where there's an evolution of that traditional. And I think it really speaks to us being able to develop our students to become autodidactic, so to really lead their own learning. We are now really going to see educators, administrators being mediators and facilitators of learning as opposed to being the sage on the stage. I think there are wonderful opportunities and options that lie ahead of us in the next 12 to 18 months.
Absolutely. And Tanika, I was really glad to hear you talk about the blessings that have come out of it. Sometimes I feel guilty saying, 2020 has been a difficult year, but it's also been a year of real abundance. And the abundance is about, we didn't just survive. we really did thrive in so many ways. And Muhammad and I talk about a lot on our team that we have wound up better than we ever were before. It's not just a response to the pandemic, but it's we're emerging even better. And you can't ever put that all back in the box again, right? That
And you shouldn't put it.
we know what we know now. And so it's an interesting way of viewing things. So let's talk about what are the biggest challenges. I don't want to spend a lot of time in negative. I don't. It's a waste of time, really. But let's acknowledge for the people that are watching our live session, let's acknowledge those challenges. Let's take 1 minute and just start throwing out what are the biggest challenges. But then I want to dig into, and what did you do about them? Right? What's the answer to those things? Let's get in the solution quickly. So Mohammed's watching the chat, and welcome everybody that's joining us live. We're happy that you're here today. Please engage with us in the chat. And so let's throw it out there, guys. What are the greatest challenges? Mohammed, if you can watch the chat, and then I'll ask you to, contribute also.
Well, in Africa, there are many children in Africa that just don't have the devices to be able to operate online. That's been a massive challenge for many of our schools. I know in Kenya, the public school system was shut down last year, and parents and children were told nobody will progress at the end of the year, as compared to those that are able to access devices, that are able to access the internet and online. Their education continued, but for many children in Africa, their education did not continue. It stagnated. And so that there is a real concern and a massive challenge for us in Africa. One thing I do know is that a solution for children in Africa is definitely not going to be to build more physical schools and trying to resource those schools with expert human or qualified human resources, but rather this online space, which allows you to tap into human resource wherever they are in the world, I think is going to be the solution for addressing equality with respect to education, particularly in Africa.
Yeah.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting topic of equity, right? And it's such an interesting topic, especially it's one thing when you're sitting in the United States and talking about equity in the United States, which is compared to when we're talking about equity across the globe, right? It's a totally different measurement. You were about to say something, Brian?
Well, I think John's right, but I think we all have to acknowledge that there's just something that's never going to replace that face-to-face human interaction.
Mm-hmm.
And so who knows what that's going to look like down the road. But, kids need to socialize in the real setting, and teachers and kids need to interact in the social real setting. But certainly, some of the basic fundamental skills and knowledge sets and even collaborations and meaningful conversations. Yeah, the technology in the future and the spaces that are going to be created, John's absolutely right. It's just going to be breathtaking. But I agree, funding is an opportunity. So I always like to talk politics and big picture revolution for education.
I'm with you there, buddy.
Yeah, and I think, when is our corporates and when are our governments going to understand that education is the opportunity in the future? It is going to be the number one economy, and in the country, whether it be China, India, the United States, or even a small little country like Kosovo, the one that decides to do a Marshall Plan with education is the one that's going to rise to the top within a generation. And so, the funding, not to be negative, as you said, Amy, but to be positive, it's an opportunity. And so I often wonder who's going to seize on that first. But just I'll make one other thought and let everybody kind of take off on it, perhaps, if they will. The other thing is what we've always known. Teachers are the number one factor. You could have everything else under the sun, but it all comes down to the teacher and the facilitator, if you will. Learning supersedes teaching. We know that now. engaged facilitation and all that, or facilitating engaged learning. But I'm a critic of the ivory tower. I really think that universities continue to fail in their teacher training programs, and I think there's so much more they can do to engage candidates in the authentic act of an experience of what it means to be a teacher instead of just learning through the books and the ideas. So I wonder what everybody's thoughts are there.
Great, thanks, Brian.
I actually would like to add to the aspect that Brian has raised with regards to teacher training. And I think even teachers that are in the system and have been in the system, whether it be decades or for years, and the transition that has needed to occur over particularly right at the beginning of last year, quarter of 2020. So I do think one of the challenges that we faced was trying to duplicate and take the traditional model into the virtual space. And to a large extent, that links to teacher training or the lack of teacher training in relation to 21st century teaching and learning. And that was really highlighted and continues to be highlighted. So it's beyond the expertise and the technicality, so to speak. But if we look through the pedagogical lens and say, what does that look like in the 21st century, utilizing computers, utilizing various apps? How does that look like? And I think that was one of the greatest challenges, is actually going through the crisis and looking at the pedagogical shift that needed to occur. But at the root of it, what Brian speaks to, the lack of teacher training or continuous professional development that would be able to speak to that gap that exists because of the ivory towers that exist that perhaps are not speaking to what is required in the classroom.
Absolutely. Teacher readiness in somewhere that
Can
we
I add
can't
something?
imagine where we're going to be. Hi, Nikki.
Sure.
Come on in, darling. What were
Yeah,
your
really,
Thank you.
it'd be great
Okay,
to hear from
so-
a teacher on this point.
Okay, so I was waiting. I tried to talk, but I was muted. Sorry. So I have a few things to say on all these comments that you guys made. First, to what John said before about having access to devices and resources. Well, in my school, we don't have a problem with that, but I think that nothing can replace the traditional school. Because I also have a story for you. During the online learning, my students were always so excited to share their work, share their stories. And I kind of always said, guys, now it's not the time because we have to finish our lesson. We also have limited time for each lesson. So we were out of school for 2 to 3 months, and then we went back. And the beginning of the second day, I was trying to handle the chaos in math. And at the end of the lesson, I was looking at their papers, and then I put my head up and I saw all the students being in groups and just talking to each other. And I thought it was so beautiful. And I just sat there and stared at them, and it was amazing. So I don't think anything can replace the traditional classroom, but I understand that online school remote teaching is going to be a big case from now on, especially this time. And we were forced to do it. So if you want, I can talk to you about my experience.
Absolutely. And I think, Nikki, what we could...
I have a message for all the teachers that are still struggling with teaching online. 3 words: be loud, clear, and realistic. Because we have to be realistic to go through this. And my biggest challenge was student engagement. I think everything has to change because I wasn't there physically to make things happen, to use my body to engage them and use my anecdotes, and I had to think of other ways of doing that, and I had to actually stick to very short teaching point and a very short time for modeling, because in the 30 minutes that we spend on each subject, it was 30 minutes. My lessons had to be very loud and clear, and then we had to spend time on actually practicing the skills, because I realized that what I did last year, which was do my lesson and then give them time to work on it during their own in the afternoon or during their own time, it didn't work. I actually had to be there to make sure everybody leaves with a solid understanding of what was taught. Another thing is assessment. Assessments were really, they took thought, and I still have to make changes. And right now we're in school, but I think we're going to go back to remote learning soon. So assessment is a big part of teaching, and it's a big part of school, and it's the only way you can assess your teaching, and it's the only way you can keep track of what the students are doing, so you can use that information later for parent-teacher conferences, to improve your own teaching methods. So my message to my contribution to this today is I understood that I had to make assessments very short and meaningful. I realized that the collection of data was very time consuming sometimes. The use of them was not always, I couldn't always use all the information I got, because I wasn't always sure the students it was 100% their work.
Nikki, I wanna press a little bit on something that you were saying there and dig into that a little bit, because I think you're hitting some real Main Street sort of pain points, right?
Yeah, because this is what I think is what's going on.
Yep. Absolutely. So when you talk about lesson structure, time, intentionality, those are all things that had to change in a digital environment, right? Assessment,
Yes.
data collection.
I'm sorry.
I want to, for one quick second, turn our attention to how do we actually know our kids are learning? How do we actually know that what we're doing is impacting our students? Mohammed?
Yeah, I want to just, there's some good chatter going on in the live chat at the moment now around that data collection piece. And it's teachers that are commenting and saying things like formative assessment was the only foundation that they could use to build their lessons on, because it was distance learning and they didn't have the teachers in front of them. I would go to cues and what my kids know and don't know. I had to come up with creative ways to collect that information. So there's a lot of talk on the live about that formative assessment piece. And it's something we heard in the last discussion as well. So I'm sorry to just jump in. I wanted to bring that up. And if you want to talk specifically around formative assessment, it looks like our audience is quite interested in that.
All right, perfect. So let's dig into it. When we talk about how our students are actually learning, and we talk about formative assessment on the last session, people were talking about the 25% of kids that don't actually learn very well in the virtual environment, right? There's those kids that are self-directed and can flourish, but there's that 25% of kids that don't. How do we know that they don't? And what are we doing about that? One teacher talked about breakout sessions. They had breakout rooms. And in those breakout rooms, they were providing additional or differentiated instruction. And we started to dig into that a little bit to say, what did those breakout rooms look like? And were they based on ability? Were they based on interest? Were they based on learning style? So if we gave children student choice on how they had to get from A to B, was that a way that we could formatively assess? So let's hear a little bit from the group about what you think and what you've seen is working. Tanika, did you have something?
I do have something to say. I think that actually has been I'll refer to blessing again, but that formative assessment has come and taken the spotlight once again, because I think for far too long we've relied on summative assessment, which to a large extent have also fed into the anxiety levels experienced by many with working towards one final assessment that leads to the entire journey. So I think formative assessment really in the sense of assessing as learning, so as students are learning, certain that they are cognizant. So there is now this meta learning that's occurring where students are aware of their learning, and then as well as assessing for or assessing for learning to see, and for that for the teacher to see how I think assessment of learning that we've all looked towards as a big mountain at the end of a particular unit or particular course. We've been able to get away with that. Practically, in my own practice, because I do teach history and African studies, and as well as working with faculty in my previous school and in my current school, I think practical tools, for example, such as Harvard visible thinking routines, have really been impactful in being able to gauge what type of learning is taking place. So I think a whole lot more practices integrated during the learning process is becoming more key, as opposed to the end reflection session that will always occur. I personally, in my own found those thinking routines that make thinking visible be very useful. I think as well something that linked to the virtual space and online platforms, and I think it's this idea that's been spoken to about that we're able to create. So I'll go back again to a humanities class, where if you're utilizing a social e-reader, such as Perusal, which is a wonderful tool where you're almost integrating, having to work with academic texts, but linking it with the social aspects of children being able to share what they're annotating their notes on, comment on each other's annotations, make they visible in written format. But as a teacher, because of the AI associated with that, your ability to track what is happening. So from the very aspect of how many minutes or hours have the child spent on this text, how many comments have they made? Were those annotations and commentary in relation to what other children were saying? So I think the aspects that Nikki spoke to about engagement amongst peers, there's so much room for that. But I'm happy that formative assessment is now taking the spotlight that it ought to have, and it is a building block to ultimate summative assessment.
Absolutely. So, John, tell me, in your highly digital school, what are you guys doing around that? How do you know your kids are learning?
Yeah, I think I need to agree with Tanika. In the world of today, technology, we're driven by data. And that's how we know that the students are learning or not. It's constant monitoring and tracking. We use, for example, with the little ones, I mean the foundation phase, they play games. And while they're playing the game, data is being collected in the background for the purposes of understanding intervention. So gone are the traditional assessment, where you sort of engage children in teaching and more teaching and more teaching. And then after 3 or 4 weeks, there's this big assessment that everybody kind of works towards. Assessment is part and parcel every lesson today. Every lesson you are monitoring, tracking, trying to understand where your children are at. We at Ivor Global Online School, we actually don't teach on a Friday. We keep Friday open for the purposes of being able to intervene. So the teachers bring back students in small groups or larger groups based on what they have seen, what they have monitored, what they have tracked. That comes through actual observation online, but a lot of it comes from the data that we're getting from all of the systems. AI is very big, as Tanika pointed out. There is so many different adaptive technologies now, especially in mathematics, where every child can actually be taken on a different pathway. It's just quite amazing, the world we're in. And you have to engage with this digital world. Otherwise, you're falling behind.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. All right, Brian, do you have anything around how are you making sure your students are learning?
Well, now you're into my bailiwick. So I'm a teacher trainer, and I have been for 20 years, right? And so the trick is, formative assessments are key. That's how we're going to differentiate. Without that data, without that experience, then we're not really scoring on the level we can to meet the needs of all learners. I'll just give you a simple example, and rather than just talk to more big ideas, because I agree with what everybody's said so far. But we've developed something called recursive application. And so it means that there are some big ideas that the kids need to practice again and again and again in third grade and fourth grade and fifth grade and sixth grade and seventh grade and eighth grade, all the way to 12th grade. So for writing literary essays or character analysis, for example, we've got 6 questions that are supported by a rubric. And each question has a rubric criteria. So here are the 6 questions. Why did the character act this way? Was it right or wrong? What did the character get from acting this way? How am I like the character in this story? What is the lesson learned? And how has this lesson learned changed the way I think?
Mhm.
So every grade level, 10 to 20 times a year, answers those questions to books at their zone of proximal development.
Mhm.
And you see now, and those cover all the basic elements, of a story in many ways, in an organic way, a natural way. So now when my kids have written those responses, you take away the questions, and if somebody didn't know you answered the questions, it reads logically like a literary essay. And so now the kids are exercising that critical thinking again and again, but at more and a higher and higher level of profundity as they progress in their ZPD. So now at the end of it all, as a habit of mind, and ultimately that's what we're trying to get to with the standards, we've got kids thinking that way. But when the teachers use that rubric with very detailed criteria for each question to assess the kids and then to guide the kids to assess themselves and one another, and exercise a little metacognition as to how well they're doing it and what they still need to do. Now the kids are just thinking that way as a habit of mind. So they move from Polar Express in 3rd or 4th grade to Old Man by the Sea and Hemingway thinking that way. And I'm going to challenge all of us and educators. How many of our kids graduate from high school thinking critically like that as a habit of mind? I might argue it's less than 20%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we
And I
need
think
more.
today-
We need more concrete models like that to drive this home. That's what my teachers are asking for.
Mhm. Well, it does seem to simplify the process for teachers, right? It gives us very clear, concise directives like Nikki was talking about. And so I think teachers, the science and art of teaching has become more and more apparent, hasn't it? Like,
Amy, let me just put in there. I love that you said that. There's the science of teaching, and then there's the art of teaching. So we all need to come together and commit to the science, because the research is clear, and it's been clearer than ever before on what works. But while we apply that science, we all must find our own art, because we
Yes.
all have to be ourselves, and we have to be innovators and critical thinkers in applying that science so that we can keep pushing it to the next level. So I thank you. I love that you said that.
yeah, I think it's important that we're reflective practitioners, right? That to the ability to be able to say, I don't know, and I don't know how to do this. And God, that lesson I just gave was a big flop. We've
Bingo.
all had those, right?
Yeah.
So in the last session that I hosted, I didn't ask this question, but I actually think it's an important question to us and to this conversation. Because Brian, you had brought up Khan Academy. We had talked about some of the people who have led the educational pathway for us. But who's making the greatest advancements in managing this digital transformation today? You could argue that IVA is making great leads. John, you could argue that your school is making great leads. reads and steps forward. But I'll throw out first, I think that David Kelly and design thinking and the work that Stanford D School is doing is actually driving educational practices in a whole new way. Why? Because agile has a whole new meaning in the educational space now. So I'd be very interested to hear, who do you guys think is leading the forefront of education today?
I'll let somebody else. I've got a lot of thoughts there, but I just spoke a bit, so I'll let somebody else go first.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because we all like to believe that we're putting our best foot forward, and we all like to believe that we have a sense of arrogance in us, and to think that, we're doing really well. But I think where it comes to the adaptive artificial intelligence and the adaptive testing that's coming out and the adaptive programs, I think that's really where we are completely reliant on people outside of that teaching space. So that science element that you're bringing in, so the actual teacher might have a very strong focus on the art of teaching, which they may not have as programmers and developers of that AI. But that AI is definitely impacting the teaching space. So I would say it's a combination of things that's actually come together to create a space that is actually leading.
Mm-hmm. I often say on my teams at HMH and in the leadership calls that I'm on, this is the first time in my life that the playing field has leveled globally. Right? Americans always think they're the best. That's just the way it goes, right? That's just the nature of Americans. I'm sorry to say that, but the Americans tend to think that. And it's the first time that I'm sitting on calls and thinking that my teachers in South Africa and my teachers in Kosovo and my teachers in Greece and the Middle East are all struggling with the exact same thing in the exact same way. And so it allows our community from being this in uniqueness to be this in our common solution. Right? And so I just think it's really interesting to watch as this evolves and changes. Taniko, who do you think are leading the charge here educationally? What is impacting you?
I think I'll answer that in two ways, speaking to what you've spoken about this even playing field that's being created. I do think within your own context, there are people that will be leading the space. So, for example, if I think in the African Leadership Academy space, and I'm going to bring it home and not speak to some, big, well-known name, but I think director of teaching and learning in our space, and I would envision directors of teaching and learning in all schools, or director of academics, as some people might speak to, that are now happy to take a leading role and really direct the mission, the vision, and the direction that each school will take. So I think in my own context, I'm going to put her name out there, but Lisa Simelani, really with regards to shifting what it means to be a teacher from being just an implementer of curriculum to really designing curricula and finding the relevant tools in order to reach student success. That's something that practically I've seen unfold before my eyes. And it's amazing that you speak to the D School, because I think the design thinking model and the work that Stanford has done really has fed quite a lot into that space. We've also done quite a bit of work, which I think has been great, with Angela Duckworth at UPenn. She really speaks to the elements, I think, what we normally speak of the soft skills, but I think in my mind, I think of that as the power skills and the psychological aspects that are linked to learning. So Angela Duckworth has really been in really helping us fine-tune and direct how we want to do things. And then earlier on, Brian, you spoke about habits of the mind, and I'll speak of that broadly. But this idea of the mind itself and our creative faculties and imaginative intelligence, if I can put it that way. We recently have started working with our year ones, which are, I think, 12th grade, 12th grade kids, with using tool. It's an imaginary tool that speaks to wishes and how you fulfill wishes. Now that might seem very airy-fairy. The very
like
specific
it.
format that we use, WOOP, WOOP. You wish, you work with the outcome, the obstacle, and then a plan. We've been meeting every single morning with our students for 15 minutes. And I think that speaks to an area of putting some soft skills, what I call power skills, alongside with the educational journey, and how the mind and habits of the mind are going to play such a crucial role in how individuals are able to function executively, are able to problem solve. And so I've taken a real interest, funny enough, in more of the psychological aspects of learning. And Angela Duckworth is really a forefront individual, as well as our director of teaching and learning, Lisa Simelani.
Thank you, Tanika. You gave us some good pointers. I know Mohammed and I were jotting things down as we think about the future health of the YouTube channel that we do. These are all the types of conversations that I really, really enjoy having. Well, Nikki, you got a big job here. Are you ready for it? I need for you to give our parents some hope. And I'd like for you to share with us how you are engaging parents. And if you had a message for our parents that are on and watching this, what would you share with them today?
Okay, I have a few things about parents too. One, they have a great opportunity to see how teaching works. To see all these things they couldn't before because their kids were in school and they went home and they were asking for help sometimes and the parents couldn't deal with it. But now they can actually see how we do it, and it's amazing. I think also they have the opportunity to connect with their kids, to help them do their work, to spend time with them. I want to think that we're going to be back in school soon, very soon, and all this is going to end. And I know it's a lot better for the kids. It's better for the parents too. But at least they had an opportunity to become involved and be there for the children.
What would you say to the parent that's thinking to themselves, but I have a senior in high school. This is real near and dear to home, folks. I have a senior in high school who's taking calculus, and I don't have any clue how to help my kid. You laugh, but that's real.
I'll say that take it easy. This is a phase. The whole world is going through it. I want to say that all the kids will shine at their own time, and I'm very positive that everything is going to be okay. I don't really know what to say about that because I know it is the case for a lot of people, especially when their children are older, and there are many cases that the parents cannot help because they don't have the knowledge. But they can always reach out to us because we're more than happy to help and meet in our own time, meet individually with the students. And I also had a comment about something that was said before about the Friday. That was I also did this. It was like a check-in day for all the lessons. So if anybody has questions, so if anybody's facing a problem such as the one that you mentioned, always contact the teacher because they have the answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you bring up a point there, and John, you touched on this earlier a little bit. It really is a team sport at this point, right? I mean, the truth of the matter is that we need for parents to engage, right? To really help be a facilitator of learning with our students. I happen to have high school students, a senior and a sophomore, and my senior in high school hates virtual learning, and my sophomore is so glad if he never has to come out of his room again. He's completely happy with the process. So all my daughter talks about is she better be able to have her senior prom. And my son is like, I was made for a pandemic. That's what he tells us. I was made for it. So I think we need for parents to recognize and have some patience around the learning process, right? And I've had to do more individual teaching. Mohammed will tell you, I send him Chloe's math problems in WhatsApp. I'm like, how the heck do I solve this? And Mohammed works the math out. And then it really does take a village. And the teachers today and leaders are working well beyond their days and times to get things done. John, what would you say to parents that are struggling?
I would say to parents to have an open mind. One of the biggest things is all parents have gone through education themselves. They've all gone through school and they have this idea of what education is and what good education is. They need to have an open mind in the same way that the world has changed. The education space is changing. Tiniko spoke about the power tools. That is what we all dream about in terms of enhancing our children's power tools, as opposed to and build on the global competencies, as opposed to the idea that we are working on, working through textbooks and regurgitating from textbooks into assessments, which unfortunately is still very rife, certainly in our country, across many of our schools. And parents often are concerned about how their children are ranking amongst other children in the school and how they are doing compared to other children. Every child has their own particular pathway, and just open your mind to a growth mindset. We believe strongly in Carol Dweck's growth mindset, and just measure yourself and be a partner with the school in taking your child a little bit to the next little step higher, bit by bit. So with our parents, I think what our parents are looking for is essentially a happy child. And at the end of the day, if you can have the fanciest buildings, you can have the fanciest 3D avatar world, but it comes back to that human connection. And if that human connection is not right, then it all falls apart. And the parents have to be the right human connection as well. They need to work in partnership with the teachers to make sure that it's all working. So I would say to the parents, lose your thoughts about what you believe education should be. Rather engage us in global current practice. We're all exploring. I don't know that anybody has got it spot on, but we're all engaging in what we believe is the right thing to prepare our students and our children for the world that they're going to live in.
Absolutely. Brian, do you have anything you'd like to share to parents?
No, absolutely. And maybe, I love everything everyone's saying, but this is one little simple thing, and this is good for all of us, but particularly for parents in trying to support their kids for that school to home partnership. Be an active listener. And so let's get a common language and shared understanding for what that means. And I like to simplify things. So in my mind, it means two things. One, when your child's speaking to you, give them your full attention, look them in the eye, and that's going to tell them that you're actively listening, right? Number two, and this is key that a lot of people don't do, and I think we fail as conversationalists. Inquire and probe a little bit. Ask questions. So if I were to ask my child a question like, so you're struggling in language arts and in writing, tell me about that a little bit. Now I'm going to be such an active listener that I'm going to listen so carefully to what they say that my goal is to ask them a second question tied directly to what they say. Then when they give me that answer, I'm again going to ask them another question tied directly to what they say, and maybe a fourth question. Now, when that conversation's over, that child's going to walk away and say, wow, mom and dad really listened this time.
Mm.
So
Absolutely.
it's important that we listen to our kids, and we have to give parents tools to that they can hold on to explicitly, intentionally to strengthen that partnership.
Absolutely. Listening to understand versus listening to be understood.
Right.
Mm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we've got a few more minutes. Mohammed, is there anything in the chat that you need to bring up from those people online that are watching us?
Yeah, there's quite a few, but I'm just going to pick one. There's been wonderful comments about the ideas on what leaders in the new world need to be and the type of students we're developing. Somebody referenced a book by Daring Leadership here, where leaders needed to have strength and then brains, and in the future they need to have heart. So that emotional piece that we're developing is important. That's where we had one. And then two, somebody quotes David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell here, a book as well, about how no one would ever wish dyslexia upon their kid, but it really does allow that child to develop a different set of strengths. And maybe this pandemic is allowing our kids to learn more about themselves and less about calculus. So yeah, those are the two that I wanted to share, and there's quite a few more in here as well. But yeah, back to you.
Thank you.
Amy, if I can just add, one of the things that has definitely enhanced what we are doing from the physical space is we are not constrained by our physical presence in terms of having to recruit the human to be physically present in a space. We can tap into people from all over the world to take part and engage with our children. So our offering is much more extended. So for example, in the languages, we offer 22 languages, whereas in a physical space, we would not be able to offer 22 languages. So it comes back to Taniko's original thing about the hybrid space. I think schools in the physical space really have to open up to to this online idea, if not in totality, certainly in some part, where they can actually expand the offering of their students. We have, for example, we're offering what we call mind and body matters, as well as entrepreneurship. And that is done through a gentleman that's based in the UK. We have teachers in Ireland and we have teachers in Norway currently teaching in our space. It's quite a phenomenal thing, to be honest, and also to have students from around the world. But to my point, just in terms of what we're offering the children and bringing the expert to the table and bringing the expert to the engagement, the online just takes that tenfold or hundredfold to another degree and another level.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so Mohammed was asked to speak to a class in Southern Ohio for one of our colleagues on a topic that's near and dear to him. And so he visited a classroom virtually, and they got the opportunity to expand their understanding. And, I throw this out there that I am always happy to join any of you virtually in your schools, that if we can expand our community and allow children the opportunity to bridge all of the preconceived notions and all of that good stuff that they enter the world with, I'm more than happy to help, as I know Mohammed and my entire team and company are. So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to leave with one thing. What is one piece of practical advice that you're going to give to a teacher starting out in this process? And I'll just open it up. One piece of practical advice, and you tag someone else.
I can start.
Great.
So if a teacher is starting now, I have one suggestion for them. even though we're transitioning again, I mean, I'm talking about elementary schools because this is my experience. Even though we're going back to the physical classroom, um, don't forget that we have been through so much, and definitely take advantage of all these things that teachers have developed. Teachers have been using the online resources, all the materials that you can find and you have free access to. Always collaborate. Other teachers are willing to help you, so uh, talk to them and about their experience, and that will really help you understand how things have changed in education and what you should do from now on.
Thank you, Nikki. Who do you pick?
Okay, Brian.
Okay, well, you know, there's some big ideas in best practice education today. You know, so we engage and facilitate kids in learning rather than teach. Learn what it means to model the authentic act of thinking and doing. Learn what it means to support kids and help them learn to turn and talk effectively. Learn what it means to coach, right? And as they're engaged in independent and self-directed learning. And really focus in on what we talked on earlier, using formative assessment to differentiate and drive instruction. There's some big ideas out there, and if you learn this science, then you're going to be a master teacher.
Thanks, Brian. Who are you passing it to, Brian?
Okay, John, tell us from the technology side.
Thanks, Brian. What I'm going to say to a new teacher starting out is that they might not be able to touch a child physically, but they can still touch a child's heart online. And the reality is this: for me, the connection you have with your child or your students is way stronger and way bigger than anything else you can ever teach them. If you show them true love and you show them what it means to be a good human being who looks after others, then you really do have a win-win situation. So for me, it is about that pastoral care, that nurturer, that carer. That's what the children want. Every child wants a champion, and they're looking to you as a teacher to be that champion.
Right, and as Brian said before, for the parents, same goes for the teachers, because if a teacher is starting online and has never met the child, they should first listen.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hmm.
You're up, girl.
Yes, I am. I think everyone's afraid to say my name.
See, I feel like I got it down now. I'm on it. I got it. You guys are easier actually than my last.
Nico.
Great. I think a new teacher, and this might sound, would you say this to a new teacher, really? I'd say prepare to practice what you preach. Because you're about to preach kindness to oneself, you're about to preach compassion to others as you speak to parents, as you speak to your students and children. And I would say you must be prepared to do that to yourself. Kind to yourself, be compassionate to yourself. Secondly, one thing you are going to preach and be doing is this idea of our students being autodidactic. So their willingness to go out there and learn for themselves and really work with what's been designed for them, but extending it in relation to themselves. Do that for yourself too, as a teacher. Be willing to go and explore. Tread slowly and don't overwhelm yourself. Learn, unlearn, and relearn. Continue that cycle. And then I am going to put one aspect which for me is extraordinary, and I see it as the great hack school edition, in that the data which we have can present so much about our students. And we're able to collate data more effectively, so much more now, to look into that space. And if you're into data analytics or any sort of that space, great, apply yourself. Because the image and the reflection which we can get back regarding our students and where they're at can really direct what needs to be done, whether in the traditional classroom or in other spaces that will continue to be created.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And thank you to everybody. You know, it's funny how when one heart speaks, another heart hears that, right? This group has kind of touched my heart, and in true fashion, the last one has been amazing. I'm incredibly grateful for the candor and the willingness to get on and share your expertise and what has worked and what hasn't. You know, we've covered this much of topics. And so I look to dig in a little bit more with each one of you. I am grateful for you. And honestly, I feel really incredibly blessed that I didn't get what I wanted, because the truth is that what is evolving is way better than I could have imagined it. So thank you for that. Thank you for giving another day of hope, Mohammed, for pulling this team together, and everybody who joined us live. We are so grateful for you being here, and we look forward to sharing more content with you on our international content cares. Be safe, everybody. Thank you so much, and we're here if you need us.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.